Hello and good morning. It is Monday, October 21st, and I am Rob. Around here, I am that developer dad. And we're working on designing and getting ready to build an administration subsystem for the DMs familiar. So let me just type project and that's not what I wanted to add there. I'm working on a subsystem will handle the subscription events that are raised by an e-commerce service. I'll be contracting with this subsystem will automate the tasks that need to be done whenever a customer signs up or changes their subscription to the DMs familiar. I'll pin this one. There we go. Last week, I did a whole lot of use case analysis. And on Friday, I focused in on looking at the different aspects of the subscription use cases, how each of those aspects may change over time, how each of those aspects may be shared from one use case to the next, and how each particular use case's context may affect the way in which a particular activity is executed. So let me share my screen real quick. I did a lot of this work, a lot of the sorting and collation work in just an Excel spreadsheet, where first I looked at the activity context, and then I looked at the different objects, the top level business objects that we're going to be dealing with the subsystem. The subscription template, the quota template, product and feature information, that's sort of reference data. The customer subscription and quota data is what's going to be subject to, or that data is going to be subject to a lot of change over time. This is sort of actual business data. This is more support stuff. We're still going to have to treat it as data, but it's got a slightly different purpose in the context of executing these activities. The next thing I did after determining sign up is initiated by the customer, it creates a customer object. Pause is initiated by the customer. It uses a customer object and alters their subscription. That's what all these little letters are in here. I've got the, the actual task or the impact of what each of these activities may have on our business objects. So I should really stop calling them business objects and start calling them resources. Load, that's going to be incredibly low delta. And when I say low delta, let's focus on delta. Delta means that particular combination of resource and activity isn't going to, I don't expect that to change very much over time. once it's in production. From moving from 0 to first release, it's going to change a lot, but I don't expect once we're live with this thing, I don't expect that to change in any material way. We might add or change some of the aspects of, or some of the attributes of a customer. We might have to change the way some of this stuff is handled, but any component that loads a customer is going to load a customer pretty much. It's going to be the same thing over and over and over again. We might have different ways that the customer is consumed, but that's going to be on the responsibility of the components that are consuming that customer. And that's how we're going to be able to handle that higher sigma, where our differences or our changes are more within the context of the activity that the customer resource is participating in. And so we've done this classification on delta and sigma axes of volatility and kind of figured things out here. Now, ideally, we want one or the other of those vectors of volatility to be low or non-existent, non-volatile. Now, I say low instead of no because I've got a sense of reality about these things. Everything changes. That's one of the few constants in software development and software creation, is that things change all the darn time. So this exercise is to help me identify and predict where that change is going to happen. And we want to isolate, or we want to break up the code for our system into components that are going to change together, rather than necessarily components that are functionally similar or what have you. Because within a set of functions or a functional area or a domain context, there could be parts of our functional area or our domain context that have to change at a different cadence than the rest of that context. So if we don't isolate the change, that means whenever something does change, we're impacting the entire domain context or the entire functional area. And we don't really want to do that. When change happens, we want to limit the area of change. And I've heard other people call it the blast radius of change. We kind of want to isolate that so that when things do change, the impact to the rest of the system is kept as small as we possibly can. And that reduces risk. It reduces the amount of time that we have to test things. It reduces the amount of time it takes us to prepare a change. And it makes the developer experience, well, not just the developer experience better, but it does things like reduce our cycle times, so that, if somebody requests a change on a component that we've designed to absorb that change, we could say, hey, no problem. Look at it, analyze it, task it out, estimate it, and say, I can have this to you in a week. And sure enough, a couple of days later, it's in testing. A couple of days after that, it gets the green stamp from Inspector 12, and it's out the door on or before that week. And we've just delivered results on time, on budget, and with high quality. We've gotten all three of those, which a lot of engineers will say, you can have it good, fast, cheap, pick two. This method allows us to deliver all three. What kind of bends there is fast, because the how much time is it going to take is a function of having this architecture in place in the first place. And fast is relative. Stuff takes as long as it takes. You can map it to construction. It takes a set amount of time to prepare the ground, dig out the hole where you're going to pour the concrete, and pour the concrete for the foundation. That takes a relatively finite amount of time, unless you run into something goofy, like some geological problems or what have you. It takes a set amount of time to build the scaffolding for each floor of the building. And by doing this design in this way, where we capture the change, we can distill everything into finite steps that are predictable. And then we chain those steps together and say, okay, well, it's going to take us a week to build this part, a couple of days to build this part. This part's fairly trivial, it'll be a day. This part's going to take 2 weeks. And we can just add those together and come up with our schedules. Like, yes, okay, we've analyzed the problem. This is going to take a month. And then we go back to the people that hold the wallets and say, this is going to take a month. And they will either say, well, can you make it go a little faster? I'm like, well, we can cut it down to 3.5 weeks if we do this, or we can cut it down to 2 weeks if we skip these parts and add those later, and so on. And it becomes a negotiation with the stakeholders. But we have to go to the stakeholders with a plan and with solid information. That's the hard part. That's where this thinking and architecture exercises come in. All right, so we've got medium low delta and moderate sigma on load quotas. Medium low delta, moderate sigma on quota template. And the reason I said that is because we've got some ambiguity around quota. We have the concept of quota, which is an allotment of uses of some feature that may or may not get refreshed each time the subscription renews. So we've got to do a little bit more work on this concept of quota before we can actually start to codify that part. All right, subscription low delta, single sigma, that one's going to be stupid easy. Subscribe, low delta, high sigma. Quota, medium low delta, low sigma. Consume quota, again, same thing. Remove subscription, low delta, low sigma. There's very finite things. And then, of course, filter for our different resources. We're fine. We also need to add filter for quota. Save that. And it's going to ask me what I want to call it. Book. I don't want to put it there. I'm going to put it desktop, content, I guess app images. Component planning. Save. All right. So where do we go from here? Well, we pull this over here, and I've got this list right here. Shrink that window down. These are our activities that refer to our resources. And we've even got a proposal for iResource task of T, where we load, save, remove, filter, and so on. where T is inherited from resource base. And that generic constraint is going to help us develop the strategies for load, save, remove, and filter. In theory. So low delta, high sigma, et cetera, et cetera. I can get rid of this note. Let's just delete that all together. Delete cell contents. You're gone. In fact, I just want to delete the whole row. Goodbye. You're going to let me expand this? Come on. Doesn't matter. Okay, so that's our resource tasks. We're also going to need I'm jumping ahead of myself. For our use cases, we've got some finite, or we've got a set of steps. I don't want to look at prompt management. So we've got Excel back here. So let's see here. Process. Bold, and I'm going to make this bigger. There we go. New customer sign up. New subscription sign up. Renew subscription. Pause subscription. Resume subscription. Discontinue subscription. Excuse me. Cancel refund subscription. Consume quota. And then there's release quota. Release quota happens. Well, consume quota occurs when they request a AI description for an NPC or ask that the NPC be saved to the database. Release quota happens when they decide to remove one of the NPCs from their database. That's a use case I didn't consider when I was drawing stuff out, but it really only affects a quota. So I'm going to change consume to consume quota. Insert a row. Release quota is initiated by a customer, uses their information, uses their subscription, uses and alters their quota, and that's really it. Applies only to some kinds of quota storage. Typically storage. Okay. So let's come back over to C, process. And then we're going to run the steps across. Verify webhook. We're going to bold those. We're going to make the whole row 18, not webhook. Webhook. Validate webhook data. And verify webhook is going to become verify webhook call. Verify webhook data. Validate API request. Validate correctness. Excuse me. Retrieve resource. Save resource. Retrieve resources. Save resource. Resources. Send email. I'm going to insert remove resource. All right, let's pop these out. All right, so new customer sign up doesn't involve a webhook call at all. Our system doesn't worry about validating the customer sign up information because that's handled by Entra. It will involve, after the fact, saving that some of that customer's information to our local database. Yes. Send email, automatic. New customers sign up. Yes. 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 Yes, we have to save. And yes, we have to send an email. Renew. Yes. And you know what? I'm going to make all of this stuff 18 point, just so that y'all can see it. There we go. So renew involves verifying the webhook call. We have to validate the data in the webhook call, make sure it's well formed. We have to validate the correctness, that the information that we're passed through from the webhook is valid for the activity that we're performing. Retrieve, yes. Yes. Resume. Yes. Resume. May happen via webhook or timed process. Webhook, timed process, or CS UI. Customer support UI. Discontinue subscription. Yes, 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 yes. And a confirmation email. This is all true. Delete. Yes, yes, yes to that, and yes to that. No, no. Actually, consume quota and release quota, these are not necessarily aspects involved in customer service or subscription management activities. These are triggered by usage activities, not triggered by customer service activities. These are triggered by product usage. Regular. Hey, Erkamus, how are you, man? I haven't seen you in a while. You been good? There we go. Included in this manifest because they're shared concepts between admin and product. Save that. I get it. Sometimes you need a break from being online. Okay, so we've got a whole lot of retrieve resources, a lot of save resources. Consume quota absolutely saves the resource. It does not send an email or remove any resources. All right, so for each of these high-level steps, the project goes good, man. The product itself is almost ready to be released. I've got like some cosmetic stuff to put in place. I want to replace the stuff on the homepage so that it's not just the sleeping kitty. I want to create a page with the feature roadmap that, things that I'd like to do with it in the future. And what I'm going to do with the feature roadmap, I think, is once I release, there's going to be a regular subscription, $10 a month. To start, I'm going to do like 100 AI generations for the NPCs, and you can store up to 100 NPCs. That's going to be $10 a month. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another tier of subscription and call it like the Founders Club or something like that, and maybe charge 20 or 25 a month. And what that does is it gives you access to my plans, early access to new features as I develop them, and I'm considering access to a private Discord channel for near real-time feedback from people that are in that particular tier. But if you just want to use the thing, I'm going to go $10 a month. And I've got a small handful of other features that I want to add once it's running. And once I've got all this boring business goo done, and those will be included in that $10 a month. If I come up with revolutionary new features, like something absolutely mind-blowing, I might consider a higher subscription tier for those, but I haven't imagined any of those yet. Because a lot of the other features aren't really going to cost more in terms of the hosting and the resources that I have to pay Microsoft for once I've got those in place. Because they're not going to take up much additional database space, if any. They're not going to consume AI tokens for a few of the things that I'm thinking of. And of course, those quotas that I talked about, those might change. If I get access to cheaper AI models that work just as well, I could increase the number of generations or use those tokens in a new feature, things like that. And storage is going to be relatively inexpensive. I do expect the SQL Server to eventually become probably the more expensive of the resources that I'm going to be leveraging. Right now it's free because I'm only using a tiny little bit of it. But as things grow and the server spends more time being awake and online, that's when it's going to start costing money. So what I'm doing starting last Monday is I'm going to be partnering with a e-commerce service, or I'm going to be signing up for a e-commerce service to handle all of the credit card and payment goo, including things like calculating and charging and submitting sales taxes, all of that stuff. I'm just going to pay per transaction and let some other company take care of that nonsense for me, because I don't want to have to track 50 states and several thousand county sales tax and charge it and send checks every quarter and stuff like that. That'll take up more time than I have. And the risk of getting it wrong and the consequences of getting it wrong are huge. So I'm going to farm that out. It also means I don't have to worry about my code being PCI compliant. Yeah, the financial stuff is incredibly touchy. The service that I'm considering, it's a company called Lemon Squeezy. They just got bought by Stripe. They handle all of that stuff. The credit card information doesn't even go through my code at all, because when they hit, subscribe, it's going to shell over to a page on Lemon Squeezy. They're going to collect all of the information, charge the card, and then send a web request into my system saying, hey, this person just signed up for this subscription. So I don't see the credit card information. I don't see any of their personally identifiable information in my code at all. And that's perfect because having to build in PCI compliance and go through all of that auditing and all of that stuff, I'm not paying myself enough for that because right now I'm paying myself zero. And it's not code that I want to write. I have written it. It sucks. Similarly with that's exactly how mobile transactions work. Is they go through some sort of payment processor. Like a lot of folks will actually shell out to Amazon. Plaid is another service. Apple Pay is closer to a pure merchant account type thing. Same thing with Samsung or Google Pay. And of course, like debit or credit card transactions, they'll go through clearinghouses and this and that and the other thing, payment processors, etc. That handle all of that goo, or a lot of that goo. But going with Lemon Squeezy, the big selling point for them over Stripe is they own the sales tax portion of things. And with Stripe, to get automatic sales tax handling, it's an additional $75 a month on top of your transaction fees. And I don't have $75 a month in sales, so it doesn't make sense to pay them that much. Right now, I have $0 a month in sales. And when I do get some subscription revenue, I expect a lot of that to go to Microsoft. So, yeah, Microsoft should pay me commission for selling their services. This is what they should do. So I'm building I'm going to be building a separate system to handle the incoming callbacks from the payment processor, handle all of the things that need to happen, because I could do it manually, but I would love to make this a source of income for myself, but realistically, I'll be overjoyed if it pays for itself and then some. Like I've got things designed right now so that 5 users will pay the hosting costs for my next 100, or so I estimate. So yeah, if I have 5 users and I only ever have 5 users, it'll make like a tiny itty bitty little profit that I'm just going to let fall into my business bank account and pay taxes out of in April, basically. I've been, during the testing and development of the DMs Familiar, I've sorted that the AI costs that I need to pay to Microsoft if somebody uses their entire generation allotment for a month is approximately a quarter, like 25 cents, maybe 50, something like that. And then the storage costs are negligible currently, but once I've got a lot of users and it's being used a lot, I expect the storage costs to go up quite a bit, because the Azure SQL database that I'm using, it does have a free tier, but it goes to sleep, and I need to really dig into the Azure pricing model to be able to predict what 100% uptime is going to run me. I might have to make some adjustments on my storage if it turns out to be bonkers. If it turns out to be more expensive, like cost more than I'm bringing in, I'm going to have to change how I'm storing information. But that's fine. I'm not that worried about it at this point. Because if I do have to change it, I can, because I've planned my architecture and I can swap out the storage technology just by rewriting a couple of components. And that won't affect any of the rest of the system. So that makes me happy. So what I'm doing right now is I'm looking at the different activities the different subset or the different steps, high level steps for these processes, and seeing which ones are common at a process from a process point of view. On Friday, I looked at the combination of resource and activity. Today, I'm looking at the combination of process or activity or process and the sub-activities within each of those processes. Pardon me. And I'm seeing a lot of share. So new customers sign up, save resource. And I feel like I should drill in a little bit here. So for verify webhook call, and I'm wondering how I want to do this. I think the way to go I only did the one on Friday afternoon. I streamed both, but I only exported one of them to YouTube, and I do that activity breakdown a little bit differently than you may be used to, because what I've done is I took the actual resource access tasks. There's four. Filter, load, save, remove. Yeah, there's four canonical tasks when it comes to saving an instance of some resource to its storage technology. And you'll notice that I'm being very, very careful about not naming particular technologies, not even naming classes of technologies. All I'm saying is it's a resource. It's something that gets stored and retrieved from somewhere. It could be a file system. It could be a database. It could be a third-party API. It could be one. It could be one, two, or more of those things. Yes, I'm purposefully remaining very agnostic right now, very mindful, very demure, because architecture is all about thinking through the real world process. And if we start spouting names of technologies, it can cloud our minds and cause, especially us developers, it can start causing us to think in terms of, okay, select, insert, update, delete, blah, 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 blah. And we start to think in code monkey terms, and then we lose our business. We lose the business people that we're talking to. Their brains shut off and they start thinking about golf or their boating trip this weekend or whatever. So I want to keep things in terms of the business activities. And you'll notice for filter, I didn't say search. I didn't say get customer by ID, get customer by name, get customer by email, get subscription by ID, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? It's filter thing. That's it. And then, of course, you build your filter mechanism in such a way that it's incredibly flexible. And so instead of having a data API that's just constantly exploding with new ways of searching your different resources, you're only ever working on or working against a single public method on your data API. And that public method is filter, because the goal of that is to get a list of those resources with their identifier within the context of your system and some displayable attributes that'll help the end user say, okay, yes, that one. But all you want to get out of it is the ID. And load. So load customer is going to take in the ID. It's going to go find the customer with that ID and send it back. load subscription, but it's only ever going to take the ID and send it back. Filter doesn't return the entire resource. It just returns what must be displayed on the screen for the consumer to decide which one they want to manipulate. Save, well, we're saving whether it's a brand new one or it's one that already exists that we've made some changes to. From a data perspective, we can hide that detail, whether it's an insert or an update. We don't need that differentiation to exist on the public data interface. Because from the point of view of a user or a business person that's contracting our system, they just want to know that the thing is going to be stored that the paper's going into the file cabinet, basically. That's all they care about, is that they're going to be able to put it somewhere and get it back later when they need it. And then remove. I'm going to use soft deletes with a delayed row removal technique for these things. So basically, all of the business data things aren't gonna be just full out deleted from the database or the storage mechanism or what have you. They're going to get flagged with a nullable deletion date. And if that value is null, it's live. If that value is if that field is populated, then we know it no longer exists. And then I'll stand up some process that runs on a timer that looks at items that are, say, 90 days since their deletion time, and then archive and get rid of them. And then after, say, 180 days, I remove them from the archive. Just for safety's sake, to handle that, oops, I didn't mean to do that scenario, stuff like that. Pardon me. So, this is what I did Friday, is I looked at the tasks, I looked at the resources, and then for each combination of task and resource, I listed out the activities in which that resource is impacted by a specific task. And then for each of these combinations of task and resource, I thought, okay, well, how likely is that code going to change frequently, or how often is that process or that activity going to change materially? And not very often. However, that activity might be used by a variety, or this resource task, excuse me, could be consumed in a variety of ways. And that's why I called it activity context. So when something changes over time, I'm going to use the Greek letter delta. Everybody uses that for change over time. That's what delta has come to mean in modern mathematics and software development, the financial world, etc. I didn't have a good Greek letter to use for change via consumption. And so I thought I'd been thinking about this for years, and I finally settled on sigma, because sigma is like sort of sum or set. So a high sigma means that a resource task may be consumed by a large set of activity contexts. And I'm going to be using this information to help me design the actual code components and segregate all of these these activity contexts and the resource tasks into components And if I do it right, my components that have a higher delta will all be grouped together. My components that have a higher sigma would be grouped logically so that if the sigma is high for the same reason, then they'll all be grouped together. If the sigma is high for different reasons, perhaps I need to isolate that a little bit more. And that what this does is it decreases the blast radius for when things have to change. And it makes the whole thing easier to build, way easier to maintain, and way easier to extend. Did that help? Like the I couldn't tell if that was terror or an eureka moment type thing. So today I'm looking at these process activities and how the process activities may or may not apply to the processes. Because ideally, I want to build a component that can verify an incoming webhook call to my system. Now, the code to verify the request might vary based on what is being done to the subscription. So to verify the data coming in from my payment processor for a subscribe request versus renew subscription, pause or resume, discontinue, cancel, refund, the data that comes in from Lemon Squeezy may look slightly different for each of those activities. But the bottom line is that we're verifying the webhook call, or we're validating the webhook data. Verify is actually even a little narrower, because to verify that, and what we're doing with verify is we are making sure that this request is coming from somebody that I have said it has permission to send me these requests, that being Lemon Squeezy. And there will be like a private key exchange type thing that happens where we set up an authentication key between Lemon Squeezy and my system. And then to verify the webhook call, there's going to be like a signature included in the header of the HTTP request that they make, that I'm going to hash that secret key with the data in the request. And if it doesn't match that value that gets passed in the header for the call, then I say, I don't know you, that's my purse, run away. It rejects that call. After we pass verify, we're going to validate that the data in the request is complete, that values in fields that I know to be dates are dates, values in fields that I'm expecting to be numbers are numbers, values that I know I need to be able to run the process are populated. But that's all I'm doing. I'm not validating correctness at the webhook level, because I want this webhook to execute incredibly quickly. I want it to go, are you who you say you are? Is the information in the right shape? Yes? Perfect. Off it goes to the API. When it gets to the API, the API will have access to my database or my storage services. It's going to be able to say, okay, so it's for this customer, this is their subscription, this is what we're doing. All right, I need to pull the customer, I need to pull their subscription. All right, what do we want to do with this? We want to renew it. Is the subscription canceled? Is it discontinued? No. Okay, boom, we can proceed. That's validating the correctness. If it's a new subscription sign up, it says, okay, so it's this customer. They want a new subscription. Let's look them up. Okay, this customer, oh, they already have an active subscription. We need to kick this back and say, hey, they shouldn't be able to do this. And hopefully the payment processor has stuff on their side that also tracks who has subscriptions and subscription status and all that good stuff. But this is just a second layer of defense in case something goofy happens at Lemon Squeezy and they allow somebody to sign up for two of the same subscription under the same identity. Retrieving resources, I mean, we're going to need to be able to pull resources for a lot of stuff. We don't necessarily need to pull resources when we're creating a new customer sign up. And I should change this to new identity sign up. So verify webhook call. Process for coming up with your set of activity contexts. Yeah. Is that just brainstorming about what my project needs to do at a high level? That's the part that felt like I was doing functional decomp and paused. Okay, so when you're listing your use cases, functional decomp is perfectly fine. It's a-okay to think functionally when you're doing your use cases. In fact, that's where I start, requirements gathering. So let's come into docs. Business rules, paid versus free decision guidelines. These are all just notes that I made. And this is what I did all last week, was brainstorm all of this stuff. The use cases, all I did was list out what the subsystem needs to do. It needs to handle the back-end tasks that occur when a customer signs up, renews, pauses, discontinues, cancels. I've got some other use cases that I want in this admin system. These are the how details, like manage the groups defined in Entra that are used to control access, blah, 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 blah. And I listed out some external systems, identity management, payment management, product capabilities, supporting data, customer management. This is all just rambling that I recorded that I'm going to be able to come back to and reference. And once I got all of that stuff fleshed out, I went into the steps. And we can see that I'm once again staying at the functional level. And that's perfectly fine when you're trying to identify the stuff that your application needs to do. Yes. You can't do any kind of decomposition, be it domain-driven design or volatility based decomp or what have you. You can't do any of that stuff until you've got your requirements. And these are my business requirements. They're very high level, they're very vague on purpose, because I haven't got a system to refer to yet. I'm quite literally pulling this system out of my imagination and my previous knowledge of how these systems need to work. I've built a few of them over my career. So, and this is just gradually drilling in closer and closer and identifying the what. What are the things that this system needs to interact with? What are the activities that we'll be performing on or using those things? And then we can start with this exercise that I'm going through where I'm looking for commonalities, areas of change, and starting to drill into the higher level activities, and how they're going to change or how they're going to be static, but be shared, how it might be different for one thing from another to another in terms of the context. So verify webhook call will be approximately the same regardless of resource or regardless of process context. Validate webhook data. The code will vary based on the activity requested in the webhook. Now, I'm going to step away for just a minute. And when I come back, I'm just going to quickly rip through and see how these things are going to vary and from one usage context to the next. I'll be right back. Now, these guys, these webhooks, should be thought of as nothing more than a client. They're a UI for a machine. These activities are going to happen in a different process from these activities. So validating the webhook call, no problem. Validating the webhook data, it's going to vary based on what we're doing, because we're going to need different data to create a new subscription than we are to renew it, than we are to pause or resume, discontinue, or cancel and issue a refund. Validate correctness. Within the context of subscription management, this will vary by activity context. Within a broader, within the context of other resource types, will also vary by resource times activity. I don't need also. Each activity Each activity will have slight different requirements for correctness. Rules. I'm getting dangerously close to specifying a rules engine. I've always wanted to build one. Retrieve resources, concepts will be similar or the same regardless of resource and activity. The implementation of each will vary at least by resource kind. And potentially by activity context. Are the details going to change drastically from one combination of resource and activity? Perhaps. Are the details that are necessary for a consumer, the consuming component, to take advantage of a providing component, are those going to change frequently? Probably not. Is the expectation of the resource access component likely to experience delta volatility? No. Will consumers of the subscription access component have a variety of ways to request that data? Probably not. I'm not likely to implement load customer for new subscription sign up, load customer for renew, or anything like that. What I'm much more likely to do is set up my access component for subscription to say, load the customer, load the subscription, et cetera, and then it'll be the responsibility of the consumer to translate that representation of the business object into whatever form the consumer needs it to be in to perform its work. And then when the consumer goes to send it back to storage to save the updated version of it, it's the consumer's responsibility to translate the updated instance of the resource back into the format expected by the resource access component. And that keeps me from having a million public functions sitting on the on the subscription access component that says, load subscription for this context, load subscription for that context, save subscription for this context, save subscription for that context, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It keeps my public interfaces narrow and tightly scoped and cohesive, so that even a non-programmer could look at, a set of boxes and arrows, could take a look at a component diagram, and let's say we've got this stuff here, and we'll add an API rectangle up here. So for new subscription, they could even look at the API code and say, for new subscription, load the customer, load the load the subscription template for the identified subscription, create a customer subscription using this customer and the subscription template. And that all happens in the Fulfillment Manager. So the API will shell over to our Fulfillment Manager that says, fulfill new subscription. And it passes the customer and the subscription ID. Retrieves customer information, subscription template information, builds the customer subscription object, saves the new customer subscription object through the subscription resource access, and sends an email that says, hey, welcome, here's how you use it. And even a regular person that doesn't write code would be able to sort of follow that manager level stuff. Or even the API stuff. We'll be able to talk to the guys in suits about what each API method does. And we'll be able to say, okay, so when the API gets called and it says create new customer subscription, how do we want these scenarios to be handled? If we know the person and it's a subscription that is currently available and that person doesn't already have a subscription with us, cool, let's build it. What about when a customer that we know who has a subscription tries to create a new subscription? How do we handle that? What are these, how does the business want these things to be handled? And we can have those conversations at a very human level with non-technical users. And if we're thinking about things in these terms, our developers are also able to think of them in terms of human language. And that makes the whole experience a whole lot easier to work with. Now, we might get into some engines or some SQL access and stuff like that where things start to get pretty wonky. And those are maybe conversations that we don't want to have with the business folks. Those are conversations we have with our Scrum teams or our build teams, if you're not using Agile Scrum or whatever. I have, although frequently I'll use a swim lane diagram. Well, no, I won't typically use a swim lane diagram for that. I've started, when I was just brainstorming, here we go. I started working up sort of a flow chart for what components are involved in a new customer. And I did that before I did my requirements documentation and before I started this volatility analysis. So now that I've got this volatility analysis done, I'm probably going to end up throwing this away. Which, Draw.io? Yeah, it's free. I love it. If you go to draw.io, you can either use it online or you can download like a local client, and it's lovely. I like it a lot. I do spend an awful lot of time fighting with the connectors and stuff like that, especially if I get into more UML type stuff, like where I'm starting to draw out the relationships between the different entities and figure out the rules and sort of the taxonomy, which is the identification of the things, and the ontologies, which are the rules of how the things relate with each other. And if you learn and understand the definitions of the words taxonomy and ontology, you're immediately going to be seen as the smart guy in the room. Be careful with that, because sometimes you don't want to be seen as the smart guy, because smart guys don't get left alone. But yeah, having to fight with the tool to get the right kind of connectors built and stuff like that is, you're going to get that with Visio, you're going to get it with Draw.io or Lucid Charts or what have you. There's a little bit too much Clippy in all of those products. So let's get back to the notes that I was making in the Excel document. So we've got verify webhook call, approximately the same, and I should spell that right, regardless of the process context. Code will vary based on the activity request in the webhook. Correct. Validate correctness will vary by activity context. Within the context of other resource types, it will vary by resource times activity. Correct. Retrieve resources, concepts are the same. Save resources, same idea as retrieve. Variability, variations that exist between uses of resources and of the resources are the responsibilities of the components that are the responsibilities of the users that requests a resource instance is responsible for translating any given resource instance into its own local idiom. Consuming components are also I'm going to put that on a new cell. Dang, blast it. Consuming components are also responsible for translating from their own local idioms, idiomatic object formats to the expected format, to the format expected by the source components. What's up, Ergy? Move resource won't vary. This activity is rare. Send email. Probably won't vary all that much. will likely be handled by e-commerce service. All right. So we're going to focus our design efforts I want to color code these guys. And I want all borders back. Validate correctness. That is going to be a light orange. Oh no. Light orange background. So I should make that a yellow background. Here we go. And we'll give it all borders. These guys are getting light blue because the resource access. Insert, legend, client code. Services, API, resource access components. And I've got to bump the font size. Bring it up to 18. So the next bit of design we're going to be doing is going to be from this services and API to the right. This we're going to develop later. I want to get the actual processes defined and coded before I wrap the, I want to get them defined. We're not going to be able to code them until we know what the data looks like coming in through that webhook. Excuse me. And it just occurred to me from translate webhook to API. Yes, 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 and yes. Translate webhook to API. Code will vary based on the activity requested in the webhook call. There we go. So now my API doesn't need to be aware of what the data looks like coming from my payment provider, because my payment provider is going to translate the data, or my webhook code is going to translate that from the payment provider format into the format that my system expects. And what does that mean? It means I can very easily change the payment provider or evolve that code as the payment provider changes what they send in their messages without having to touch any of the back-end systems. None of it. because the webhook implementation code will be aware of what the data should look like for the API and be able to translate what comes in the requests to that API format for me. So when this goop experiences change, because it's highly likely to experience change, I can update this code and not have to touch anything to the right. And until I added this step into the webhook area, I was going to have to change my API every time this changes. And I didn't even think of adding this until I typed in these reminders to myself. And I just saved myself probably a week of having to mess around with stuff to get things talking to each other correctly. That was what? 5 minutes of thinking just saved me about a week's worth of coding. Planning matters, friends. And I am almost a half hour overtime. So I'm going to put a pin in all this. And when I come back this afternoon, we're probably going to start some amorphous diagramming. I know I've got a few that I've created already, but I think those might start getting thrown away. We'll see. Yeah. So I'll be back at 1 p.m. Eastern. We're going to pick up where we left off. Erky, it's great to see you again, man. Hopefully you can join me a bit more regularly. I always enjoy when you come in. You ask great questions and they spawn really great discussions. So yeah, I'm happy when you join me, dude. I'll be back at 1. Until then, go eat some food, drink some liquids, and happy coding. See you again real soon, friends.